Welcome my beloved student, how you doing? Hope you all are doing great and lovely. And I will start uploading regular video on time. In this video we are gonna see, what if Deku destroyed Hero Society after being rejected. This is part 1, and for more amazing content, leave a like, share and subscribe. And I wanna thank the author of this story named Hero Bane by HONNEY78 and Wizibirb. So do check out and leave kudos. Let's get in the video.
Craving something a little spicier? Step into my world of exclusive 18+ anime podfics on Patreon. Dive deep with Deku, Naruto, and more like you've never experienced before. Kuronai moaned as she was pounded from behind by her student. Her greedy little seemed to take his great enthusiasm. They were currently in Naruto's apartment, to be more specific. Or unlock the secrets, explore the fantasies, and indulge in the stories too hot for YouTube. Ready to join? Click the link and let's get started.
Midoriya Izuku, as she was known to most of the world, stood atop the roof watching All Might leave. Everything had come crashing down, her whole world had been shattered. Bitter, angry tears fell from her face as she watched a hero bound off with the bottle containing the sludge villain. After having been saved, Izuku needed to know. She needed to ask her idol if she could do the same, if she could save people with a smile. If she could be a hero. So without thinking she had latched onto the pro-hero's leg, desperate for some form of recognition. In turn, the hero turned out to be a withered empty husk of his former self. The smile was hollow as he put it. The hero had no choice but to reveal his massive scar and damaged form, claiming Izuku could never be a hero and that he should give up and find a new dream. Izuku felt something break inside of her as she watched All Might leave. Her idol, the #1 hero, had written her off as nothing more than an extra. A side character for someone else's story, a person to be rescued and nothing more. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. Perhaps if it had just been the rejection of her dream, things would have been different. Perhaps if she had been born in the right body or Japan's best hero had acknowledged that she was a she at all, it wouldn't have broken her. She felt another stab of pain as she tried to justify what had happened. Maybe he was in too much pain or didn't notice when I corrected him. He just kept saying young man. It cut Izumi to her core, tearing up what little hope she had left. In another timeline perhaps she could have been stronger and laughed it off, but not this life. Maybe if she didn't already hate herself more than anything for feeling as she did, or if she had faith that things could get better, or if her mother had still been alive. Instead all Izumi could do was stare down from the top of the roof, wondering if it would hurt when she landed. You want to be a hero so bad. I've got a time saver for you. If you think you can get a quirk in the next life, just take a swan dive off the roof. Her best friend's words aided her as she looked at the drop below her. Kachin was right. She couldn't continue on. What was the point if she couldn't even be a real girl? If she couldn't feel her mother's embrace again? She would always be seen as a tranny and a quirkless freak. She wasn't sure which insult hurt more at this point, and the only person who had ever cared was gone, collateral damage during a villain attack. Time moved forward, and no one seemed to notice the girl staring down from the edge of the roof. She would just be another casualty of the system, someone no one would miss. Just another statistic like mom. Finally she couldn't take the pain anymore, and she took a step forward. She no longer feared the pain that would precede the eternal darkness. At the last second she felt someone grab her and yank her away from the edge. I would prefer you not do that, kid. Don't need people poking their noses around here. Izumi fought back for a moment trying to fall forward, but the person behind her simply held on. Izumi wiped her tears away and looked back, blinking at the man who held her back. He was fairly tall, slightly muscular, short gray hair parted to the right, pink slanted eyes. He had a gap between his front teeth and was wearing a dark purple, almost black business suit with a white shirt underneath. The man adjusted his glasses. Come on kid. He reached up with his free hand and grabbed the cigarette in his mouth, taking a drag. I normally don't just help people for free, so consider it payment for not offing yourself here. Izumi eeped out as she was hefted up like she weighed nothing. For a moment she thought about fighting back, but she didn't have the strength anymore. It doesn't matter, I was going to die anyways. She went limp in his arms. Her analysis notebook falling to the floor as she resigned herself to her fate. The man stopped and grabbed the notebook before carrying Izumi inside the building. Izumi stood in the man's apartment watching as he began locking up the door, before gazing down at the notebook with a raised eyebrow. So tell me kid, why you want to commit suicide? Izumi bit her lip and looked down, flinching as he took another drag from his cigarette and exhaled. Smoking will kill you. So does jumping off buildings, he said, opening the notebook now that he was done examining its burnt and crispy exterior. Another gift from her friend. She watched as the man's eyebrows rose in shock and he began to sit up straighter, examining the book with a look of awe and disbelief. He closed it and looked back to the title, still barely visible through the char. Kid, are you telling me that you have 12 other books like this? Izumi shivered under the man's cold, calculating, intense gaze. She rubbed her arms and gave a weak nod. "Alright, spill it, young man, why did you try to kill yourself?" "I'm not a boy." Izumi shouted, snapping at the misgendering. If he was going to hurt her, he might as well do it over something everyone else hurt her for. "Okay, so because you were bullied for being transgender?" The man gave her a look she could only describe as sympathetic. Not just that. I don't have a quirk, all I ever wanted to do was help people. I wanted to be a hero, but All Might said I couldn't, said I should give up, that I should find a new dream. My best friend told me to take a swan dive and pray to get a quirk in my next life. No one cares, after mom died no one else cared. Dad beat me when I told him I was a girl, still does when he bothers to come home. School is no better, at least I know dad won't always be home, too busy getting drunk or something, but the bullies, it's every day, but teachers overlook it because I don't have a quirk and they don't want to hurt a promising student." She wasn't sure when she had started to cry, but she was unable to stop as she continued to spill everything to this stranger. I am a girl, but no one accepts that. They call me a freak, a tranny and a quirkless loser." She hunched over, crying even harder. "All I ever did was want to help people, I just wanted to be a hero, but I can't go on, it hurts too much." "Wait, the man who signed this?" The man looked down to the notebook, turning to the page that had All Might's signature. "Said you couldn't be a hero?" He put down the notebook and started to laugh. It was a bitter, dark, hateful laugh that caused Izumi to shiver in confusion as she glanced at the man. "Fucking dumbass heroes. Sorry kid, I just can't believe it. Look, I ain't good at this mushy shit, but I can help." He smiled again, this time it was an empathetic smile, missing that cold, calculating glint in the man's eyes. "My name is Akuta Kijero, but you can call me Jiren. What's your name? And not your dead name, no one needs to hear that ever again." "My mom called me Izumi. Midoriya Izumi." Izumi said, her voice hoarse. No one other than her mother had ever reacted positively to her, admitting she was transgender. "Midoriya, huh, alright kid, I am going to help you out. I can get you started on your transition as well as deal with your deadbeat father." She looked at the man, blinking in disbelief. "I can also help you with your dream, you want to make a difference, kid, I think you can." Jiren nodded to her hero notebook. "With that mind of yours, I think you can do more than any hero ever could." "What do you say, Izumi? Want to change the world? Are you a hero?" Izumi asked as somehow hope began swelling in her. "Fuck no, I work on the other side of the law, kid. I am a villain according to society. In reality I just procure items and services for people. I am what you call a fixer, I find what people need and earn a profit while I'm at it." "Why do you want to help me then?" "Because Ms. Midoriya, that mind shouldn't go to waste. Quirk or no, I think you can change everything." The stench of booze hit Izumi as she got home, panic building as she looked around. Luckily she didn't spot her father, merely knew empty booze bottles strewn about the floor. Jiren stood next to her, his face impassive as he looked around. "What a shithole, grab your stuff, kid, I gotta make a call." "Oh, if you are fine trading, to avoid debt you can give me some of those notebooks in exchange for new clothes and a bed or something." Jiren gave Izumi a nod and stepped out. She still couldn't believe this was happening, the man who claimed to be a villain was helping her more than any of her teachers, friends, or heroes ever had. They had come to an agreement, she would exchange analysis on heroes for a place to live and help in her transition. Izumi headed to her room, ignoring the sickening sensation of being back home. She stopped in front of her door and flinched, the All Might sign mocking her as she stared at it. She screamed as she reached out, grabbing it and throwing it down the hall. Her thoughts grew darker as she felt her chest heaving in rage. It wasn't fair, how come the only one that was helping her was someone that society said was wrong? She started to laugh as she opened the door to her room. If society says that Jiren is a villain, she looked at the posters of All Might lining the wall and scowled, viciously ripping them up as a wave of catharsis washed over her. If they say that I am a useless Deku, she looked at her desk, taking her All Might figures and tossing them at the wall, watching in satisfaction as they shattered. If they say I am not a real girl, she reached in and grabbed the one dress she owned. It no longer fit, but her mother had bought it for her when she'd first told her. Then I simply have to change society. She was about to leave when she stopped. A picture, hanging from her hero board, her and her mother. She reached out and took the picture, holding it close before slipping it into her pocket. Lastly, she grabbed her hero analysis notebooks, the rest of the room was a pile of trash. She gave one final look around the room, stopping as she saw one of the articles she had pinned. Eraserhead villain or hero. She stopped and reached out, touching the article with a thoughtful look in her eyes. Then again, maybe some of them suffer too. I need to verify this first. She felt herself grow cold as she took several of the articles she had on people who might be different. Society needed to change, but that didn't mean all of the heroes were the problem. She took one last look at the broken All Might merchandise strewn throughout the room. The man was nothing more than a hollow smile, a fraud, a fake, she would show them all. An hour later she walked away from her prison, she was never going back. Nothing inside there was worth anything to her, she wouldn't be a useless Deku anymore. Izumi was going to change everything. Jiren. Izumi spoke as they walked away, the man had spent the whole time on the phone. She still had no idea who he had called or why. Yeah kid. Can we make one last stop? Just tell me where. I want to stop by a friend's house. Dear Kachin. You were right, I was being an idiot, thinking I could be a hero, I will never be anything more than a useless Deku. How could I even think to stand up against you, with your amazing quirk? How dare I have been born in the wrong body, and just want to be a girl? How dare I ever bother falling for you? You don't have to worry about this anymore, though. I am following your advice and taking that swan dive. Hopefully I can live up to your expectations in the next life. Love Izumi. She smiled down at the note and slid it into the Bakugo family mailbox. Did you really love the kid? Not at all, I just want to hurt him as bad as he hurt me. Let's go. Should remind me to never piss you off, kid, you will go far. Don't cross me and we will go far, Jiren. I like your style. Got a name figured out yet? Hero Bane. Izumi felt like the entire world was shaking. Dust and debris were making it impossible for her to see anything more than a few centimeters in any given direction. She opened her mouth and screamed out in terror, Mom. Where are you? Mom. A large chunk of debris nearly crushed Izumi, she had barely managed to jump out of the way. She stumbled to the ground, wincing in pain as she began coughing, when a new wave of smoke filled her lungs. She had no idea what was going on, she and her mom had been out shopping when everything had just gone to hell. She tried to stand, but another quake sent her tumbling forward, that was when she caught a glimpse of her mother's green hair. Mom. She rushed forward, real life flooding through her as she reached out. Mom, I couldn't find you, Mom. Her mother had not responded nor moved, she brought her trembling hand forward and moved her mother's hair out of the way of her eyes. Her mother's normally expressive glimmering emerald green eyes stared back at Izumi, lifeless and dull. No, no. No. Izumi reached out to grab her mom, only to have someone pick her up by the waist and pull her out of the chaos. Mom. Izumi awoke completely drenched in sweat and screaming for her mom. She struggled to come to her senses as the remnants of the dream slowly faded away. Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she swallowed the bile in her mouth and shivered, just a dream, no, just a memory. She whimpered and bit her lip harder, trying to focus on the present. She curled up in the unfamiliar bed, pulling the sheets tightly around herself. The door to the room cracked open. You done screaming bloody murder, kid? Thank God I soundproof the walls, that would be awkward if the neighbors had heard. Izumi blinked at the stranger in confusion before the events of yesterday slowly worked their way into her sleep-addled mind. Sorry, I shouldn't have, I am sorry. Izumi felt her breath quicken as fear crept into her. No need to be sorry, kid. Jiren took a puff of his cigarette as he watched her. It was about your mom, right? Heard you calling out for her. Izumi flinched as the memory threatened to overwhelm her again. Yeah, she died during a clash between a hero and a villain, I still don't know who the fight was between. They refused to tell me. She began rambling, unable to stop herself. Dad beat me every time I woke up screaming, he beat me when I said I was a girl, he beat me when he was drunk, and he was always drunk. It's part of the reason I want to help people so they won't have nightmares. So they won't be beaten. She disentangled herself from the mess of blankets. I won't scream again, sorry. Bloody hell, kid, you don't have to apologize, it's okay to have nightmares. We all do. Jiren pinched the bridge of his nose, his face twisting darkly for a brief moment. Your dad was a real piece of work. Don't know how you can still have that drive to help people after what he put you through. Jiren seemed to be looking into her very soul as he took another puff. I gotta admit though, I don't dislike the attitude or the drive. Once you learn the true way of the world, though, well, it should be interesting to see if you still can hold on to those ideals. Anyways, like I said, kid, you have nothing to apologize for. Izumi wondered what Jiren meant by learn the true way of the world. She had seen plenty of shitty things, but the way he said it with such certainty caused her to shiver in worry. Jiren simply took another drag off his cigarette. I got a doctor's appointment for you scheduled in like 2 hours, figured you wanted to get a shower in before we go. I'd offer you breakfast, but you have to be fasting for your blood work. Jiren moved out of the doorway and headed back into the common room of their 2-bedroom apartment. After that we can pick you up some new clothes and necessities for your room. Izumi frowned. All that sounded really expensive, and she only had so many hero notebooks. What would I owe you for all that? Izumi asked, deciding that she would decipher his cryptic words later when she wasn't still shaken from her nightmare. She grabbed a towel and some of the clothes she had brought from her house and joined Jiren in the living room. Smart move, Izumi, always make sure you know the cost of a deal. Don't want any debt. In this case, I will take the hero notebook you had yesterday and you can consider the rest an investment in our future business ventures. I honestly think we can make each other a lot of money, kid. Oh, one more thing, I already enrolled you for online school using a fake ID. That mind of yours is too sharp to let it dull. Izumi blinked, she didn't understand why Jiren was going out of his way for her. Everyone else had simply claimed she was useless, yet he seemed to see something of value in her. Although he made it clear yesterday that I am just a business partner, even still it felt nice to have someone else believe in her. Before Jiren only her mother had ever believed in her or seen any worth in her. Jiren led her though downtown Musatafu, an area that her mother had told her she was never allowed to visit, at a leisurely stroll. He had an air about him that made people scuttle out of his way, part of her wondered if it was his quirk or maybe a skill that could be learned. The more she watched the man, the more she began to realize it was a cultivated skill. The way he carried himself and his general demeanor just screamed that everyone was beneath him and should get out of his way. Wonder if I could cultivate this skill. She rolled her shoulders back and straightened her spine, stopping herself from stooping over as was her natural tendency. His posture is better than mine, and I don't think I can get that gaze down quite yet, but she ignored the quizzical look he gave her as she attempted to emulate his demeanor. Alright Izumi, a few rules about this place. Number 1. Keep a close eye on your belongings. You will get pickpocketed if you aren't careful. Number 2. Don't start shit unless you can handle the person and at least 4 of their friends. 3. Bringing up cops or heroes in a positive light is a surefire way to get on everyone's shit list. He spread his arms out wide, as if he was showing off some freshly unveiled statue to a crowd of critics. This is it, kid. Where the forgotten go to fester and become villains, all because the world shuns them for either their quirk, appearance, mental health, gender, or because they're poor. Welcome to what everyone calls the breeding grounds. Jiren let his arms down as he looked around the slums. Izumi could see people staring wearily at both of them. The eyes of the resident sent chills down her spine, they all looked so angry, worn down, exhausted, and bitter. It was a haunting gaze that sometimes greeted her in the mirror. Everyone who ends up here, whether by choice or by birth, rarely makes anything of themselves other than being what society calls a villain. Hero society has reduced those deemed unworthy to nothing more than fodder for them to pad their stats. Jiren's voice started to grow colder. Why deal with corrupt politicians or truly evil people when you can oppress those who are simply stealing so they can eat for the day? He shook his head, his tone bitter and angry. These are your people, Izumi. Don't expect a warm welcome, though. After all, it's every person for themselves here. Though she thought to herself, if what he said is true, Izumi held back the bile in her throat. If heroes really do just use people like this to pad their stats and ignore corruption if it was true, she finally understood what he meant by learn the way of the world. She had started to realize how much heroes sucked after yesterday, but now she could feel that turning into a deep, seething hatred. She would need to verify this new information. Eventually they arrived at their destination, a simple door attached to the back of a building at the end of a dark alleyway. Izumi felt tense as she followed Jiren, her posture worsened as years of abuse and bullying took hold. She drew in on herself, trying to make herself seem as small as possible. Hopefully everyone would overlook her, she tried to ignore Jiren's unreadable glance. Don't worry, I won't let anyone hurt you. Gotta protect my investment. He gave a confident smile and raised his hand, knocking on the door. Oi, Kishitani, open up. A slider in the door opened and a pair of piercing gray eyes locked onto Jiren and Izumi. Izumi flinched and took a step to the side, placing herself just behind Jiren, so those cold calculating eyes focused on him more than her. You're late. Came the distinctly feminine voice from behind the door. What? No, I'm not, now open up. You are just stalling, so I will be late and you can charge me more, you bloody money vampire. Jiren said, clearly annoyed. The woman let out an annoyed tsk as she closed the eye slot and opened the door. Izumi blinked as the woman came into view. She was tall, very tall, at least 180 centimeters. She had voluptuous hips, a soft, small bosom, her long wavy hair was a light shade of bubblegum pink, and she was wearing a black choker with faded skinny jeans, a black tank top, and a lab coat. What can I say? I have to stay out of the red somehow. This my new patient. Yup, Midoriya Izumi. Kishitani finally moved to the side and let both of them in. Jiren walked in and turned to the right, flopping into one of the many chairs that made up the waiting room. If Izumi was being honest, she could barely tell this was a back alley dock in the middle of Musatafu's slums. The waiting room looked identical to nearly every other doctor's office she had been in. But the sole exception being that there wasn't a throng of magazines strewn about. While Izumi had been examining the waiting area, Jiren had produced an envelope and handed it to Kishitani, who looked inside once before pocketing it. Very well, follow me Ms. Midoriya and we can get started. Izumi hesitated and cast a glance at Jiren, who was already on his phone tapping away. She bit her lip and shook her head before following Dr. Kishitani. She was led down a well-lit hallway and into an examination room. Once again she was shocked by how similar everything was to a traditional doctor's office. She had expected poorly lit dirty areas out of a horror film, not this. First let's get some basic information. Stand with your back against the wall. Izumi followed Dr. Kishitani's instructions as her weight, height, blood pressure, and other basic vitals were taken. You are a bit below your ideal weight, though I suppose that is not a surprise, given you were abused. She gave a nod, pulling on a pair of gloves. Stick out your arm, let me draw some blood. Oh, how did you know? Izumi asked, frozen in place as she stared in wide-eyed terror at the doctor. Kid, you have unexplained bruises, burns, and scars all over your arms and shoulders. You flinch whenever anyone makes a quick movement, and you shrink in on yourself to make yourself a smaller target. I could go on, but the biggest giveaway was the fact you are with Jiren. The guy may act tough, and hell, he has done his share of crime and horrible things, but he has a soft spot for kids and can't stand to see them in abusive situations. It's one of the reasons I will always take his calls. Now stick out your arm. I don't have all day. Izumi was too shocked to argue. She extended her hand and barely flinched as Kishitani started to draw 4 vials of blood. Why did you tell me this? Oh, that's easy, fucking with him gives my life meaning. That, and I keep telling him to pay in advance, and he never does. Kishitani let out a deep husky laugh. I just thought he wanted my hero note, she muttered under her breath as she watched the vials fill one by one. Oh, don't get me wrong sweetheart, that is definitely a bonus. He is a businessman to the core and will gladly turn a profit when he can, but he is doing it because he can't stand child abuse. Guy cares too much for his own good, it's gotten him in trouble once or twice. Dr. Kishitani set down the last vial and grabbed a cotton swab. Hold this in place. She worked quickly as she put everything away and put medical tape on the swab holding it in place. She took off her gloves and threw them in the trash, smiling at Izumi. Alright, once I get the lab results I can prescribe your medication. Though, luckily for you, Jiren paid for my quirk, so we can do some prep work before you get your meds. Kishitani stood and took off her lab coat, heading to the sink as she began to thoroughly wash her hands. Their quirk. Izumi couldn't help but be interested. Quirk analysis was the one thing she considered herself good at. She produced her notebook and pen, turning to a blank page. Kishitani raised an eyebrow and looked around, clearly confused as to where Izumi had been keeping her notebook. You expect me to just give you that information for free? You sure you're with Jiren? She cocked an eyebrow at Izumi, who simply felt her face burn in response. Before she could ramble out a reply, Kishitani spoke again. Relax kid, it was a joke. I call it fat redistribution. Besides being great at turning any steak I buy into a perfectly marbled cut, it also allows me to do this next part. You see, part of the point of hormone replacement therapy, or HRT for short, is to help you get the body you want. In cases of male to female, this involves softening of the facial features, thinning out body hair, and allowing you to grow breasts and an ass. So I am going to go ahead and change up the fat distribution of your body so it looks like you had been born in the right body. For a moment Izumi forgot to take notes of the woman's quirk as she stared slack-jawed. Really? You can do that? She stammered, I thought that I would have to wait years to even have a shot at the right body. She felt her eyes tearing up as she stared at Kishitani in pure wonder. Yeah, really? Kishitani shook her head and looked at Izumi with pity in her eyes. Though I have to warn you now, considering you are a bit malnourished, you don't exactly have a lot of fat for me to work with. But I can do what I can, and you can focus on having a healthy diet, and in a few months when we do your follow-up, I can use my quirk again, just make sure you get Jiren to pay ahead of time. She snapped her fingers, making Izumi jump. Oh, and get him to tip me, she added with a smile. An hour later Izumi stood in front of a mirror, her eyes not believing what she saw. Her face looked softer and more feminine, she had a slight swell to her hips, and the front of her shirt now protruded slightly from where her breast sat. She felt tears forming in her eyes as she turned on her heels and launched herself at Dr. Kishitani, hugging the woman desperately. Dr. Kishitani, for her part, froze up and stood there awkwardly before grumbling under her breath and relenting, giving the anxious green-haired girl a hug. You are welcome. Also I need you to do me favor. Izumi looked up and saw Dr. Kishitani smirk. Go ruin Jiren's day by making him buy you bras and plenty of girly clothes. Enjoy watching the clerk give him weary glances. See you next week, Ms. Midoriya. Izumi held on a moment longer before wiping away her tears and pulling back. Thank you. You are very welcome, Izumi-chan. Kishitani said with a soft, warm smile. By the time they got back out to the waiting room, Jiren was on a phone call. I see, and did you make it clear what would happen if he approached her ever? Jiren was sitting with his back towards Izumi and Kishitani. Good job, your payment will be in your account once I verify. Hey, don't get snippy with me. Ask anyone. I always verify first, gotta go. Jiren turned and gave a nod. Are we good to go? Ishitani nodded, folding her arms over her chest. She has a follow-up next week to get her actual hormones, don't forget. Jiren rolled his eyes, waving a dismissive hand. Please, like she would let me forget. See you next week, Kishitani. Let's go, Izumi, gotta get you some food before the good doctor kicks my ass for not feeding you. And I would, too. Remember what I said, Ms. Midoriya, and I look forward to seeing you next week. She gave Izumi a nod and turned to head back deeper into her office. Izumi felt her face blush as she turned to Jiren and gave a nod. What's for lunch? Jiren grinned, heading for the door. I know this great teriyaki place. Izumi stared at the computer screen, her face darkened as she scrolled through the police document. She had been living with Jiren for 6 months now, and in that time she had learned more of how the world worked than in her previous 15 years of life combined. She closed the screen, the facts lined up and everything seemed to check out. The number 2 hero Endeavor had burned an orphanage simply because it had been in his way, all the while the media said it was the villain who had done so. She felt sick to her stomach. How is it he is allowed to get away with this? 15 children had suffered minor burns, and 2 had required emergency attention. She gritted her teeth in anger. The more she looked into hero society, the more obvious the faults became. Her mind flashed back to what had happened just the other day in the breeding grounds. Izumi was in the middle of her follow-up when alarm bells started to ring. Izumi looked around confused until Dr. Kishitani shook her head and muttered a curse under her breath. Hero siding with multiple sidekicks in tow, probably a raider stat padding. Izumi felt her gaze darken as she stood up. I need to see this. Her voice was even darker than her gaze. Dr. Kishitani took one look inside. I have a bolt hole that leads to the roof, go up there if you must watch. I can do some paperwork I'm behind on and lock this place up tighter. Izumi gave a grateful nod to the doctor and made her way to the roof. She had to see what was happening, she had to know if the rumors were true. She crept along the roof silently until she was overlooking the main road. She recognized the woman covered in plastic armor, not that it was particularly difficult. Plastique, currently ranked 308 on the hero leaderboards. Quirk plastic manipulation. Her suit is made out of a specialized plastic that is hardened to withstand most blows. Flanking her were 2 of her sidekicks. Izumi dug through what she knew of the 2 from Plastique sidekick registry. One was obvious, hero name. Brick, Quirk could make bricks from his body. The last one, if she had to guess, hero name. Payback, Quirk. Counter after taking a hit, can return the hit with the same force. Izumi felt a chill, all 3 had very offensive quirks, and their body language screamed they were looking for a fight. People all around took one look at the trio and turned the other way, wanting nothing to do with them. Izumi watched with narrowed eyes as Brick produced a brick and chucked it without warning. She gasped as it sailed into a pedestrian who had been trying to flee. Look, we gotta run her, boss, Brick's gravely voice rang out. Izumi felt her rage only grow as Plastique and Payback nodded, stalking confidently towards the man who was stumbling, trying to get up. Plastique produced a pair of cuffs and handed them to Payback. Good work. Cuff him and we can run a background check for known felonies when we get back. Plastique said as if it was a foregone conclusion that the man would have a record. Izumi felt sick to her stomach as the man stumbled away trying to shake off his concussion. Her horror mounted as Payback stepped forward and delivered a kick to the man's ribs. Stop resisting arrest, Payback snarled. The man collapsed into the ground. At the same time, Brick produced another brick and took aim. He threw the brick towards another person who was running, only for the brick to stop in mid-air, hovering just before its target. Look at that, illegal quirk use. Brick took a stance, producing more of his signature weapons. Plastique gave a nod, take them down, and anyone else who resits Payback, hurry up and secure the prisoner. We have a lot of work ahead of us to clean this place up. It was then that people started coming out of the buildings, surrounding the 3 heroes. Yeah, no, came a voice from the crowd. You can leave now with your hides intact, or we will make you leave. You see, this is the problem with this place, you can't do a simple patrol without a bunch of gangers showing up, take them down. The media heralded Plastique as a brave and noble hero, but Izumi could never forget the scene she had watched. They had offered Plastique an out, but she had simply written them off as gangsters and thugs. Izumi flinched as she recalled one of the familiar faces, Hayato, a simple street vendor. He had a wife and kid and was doing his best to support them by selling handmade taiyaki. The media went on to paint him as a thug with multiple felonies, but in reality he was a simple man trying his best for his family, who was angry because his friend had taken a brick to the back of his head without any warning. The people of the breeding grounds had fought tooth and nail, and the heroes had barely managed to fend off the brutes and thugs. In the end, some 20 people were charged with felonies and were facing varying amounts of jail time. It was too much, she couldn't take it anymore. At first she had been content to just offer analysis and work from the shadows to deconstruct the heroes and their twisted society. Now, she wanted to truly live up to her villain name, Hero Bane. She was going to take them all down herself. She opened the safe in her room and pulled out 3 notebooks. 2 of her older notebooks and 1 brand new one. She really hoped she didn't have to use the new one. She needed to barter with Jiren, she just hoped he would hear her out. If not, she would sell off her notebooks and move out. She took a deep breath and headed to the living room. Her target was sitting on the couch typing away on his laptop. "Jiren, we need to talk," Izumi said, trying to keep the anger from her voice. Jiren didn't even flinch, he simply grunted in response and gave a nod, tapping away at his laptop. She tossed a hero notebook onto the counter, getting his attention. He looked at it and shut the laptop. "You know that is a horrible bartering tactic." His eyes lingered on the hero analysis notebook. Izumi flashed a smile. She disagreed, this was a necessity. She was about to ask for something very expensive. "I need your services. I have made a decision. I'm not gonna just sit back and trade information to bring about the fall of heroes." She paused, her lips curling into a demented grin. "I am going to bring them down myself." Izumi couldn't have hidden the rising rage in her voice even if she wanted to, her tone growing more sinister by the second. "The more I look into things, the clearer it becomes. Heroes and the Hero Commission are a plague upon the society. They are elevating corrupt politicians to further their own agenda, and that, in turn, worsens things for everyone. It all stems from cut corners in the beginning, back when they had to flood out new heroes who weren't ready for the responsibility." Jiren looked her in the eye, carefully choosing his words. "Alright then, what's your plan? No offense, but it better be a good one. You are at a disadvantage. I'm not saying you can't do it, just that it's going to be hard and you need a plan." Izumi sat down across from Jiren and looked him in the eyes. "I have one." "Let's hear it." Izumi gulped as she tried to keep her calm, her nerves and overactive brain were threatening to overwhelm her. "Well, that's the problem, I have many plans, Jiren. Which one I use depends on information." She pointed at the notebook she had provided, "That is payment, I want you to find out who killed my mom." She looked up, a fire burning in her eyes, as Jiren simply took a deep drag of his cigarette, picking up the notebook and flipping through the first few pages. "Go on," was all Jiren said. His face was an unreadable mask. "Look, I wish I could just agree that all of society is rotten and needs to be torn down." Izumi thought about the plastique incident and how the news had treated that. She felt her rage flare, but it wasn't all-encompassing, she still had hope. "I know that there are problems with the system. I would have to be a dumbass not to recognize it or living with my head buried in the sand. I just still think that these are only minor flaws that can be fixed." Izumi felt frustrated, she wasn't doing a good job of explaining how she really felt. Jiren, for his part, wasn't trying to rush her at least. "I am going after one hero to prove 2 things. First, that things can and will get better when it is pointed out, second, that I can be useful without a quirk." The last part carried all the venom and anger she felt regarding that fact. "If I can bring a hero to justice and make them pay for what they did, well, I think that will be enough for me. After that, I will sell information and find corrupt heroes and bring them to justice." As Izumi kept talking, she could feel her resolve building. "I am going to take down the hero that killed my mom." She looked up with pure rage in her eyes. "They hid everything, even now at best there are only theories, all anyone knows for sure is it was a clash between a villain and a hero. It's all locked behind miles of red tape, an entire section of town destroyed, and all we got was an apology. No repercussions paid to those who lost loved ones. No damages paid to the property owners." She grabbed at the side of the couch, she felt so angry. "I am going to bring to light what happened and that it was covered up. I am going to take down whoever is responsible. So what I need, Jiren, is for you to find out who I will be taking down. Once I take them down and humiliate them, I will expose what happened and let society fix things." She tried to give a confident smile. "I am betting society is worth saving." Izumi wasn't sure how much she believed her last words or even cared, but Jiren's half-hidden smile made her believe they had been the right choice. He always seemed so driven to his cause, so Izumi felt that if she played into it, he would be more likely to help her out. Jiren, for his part, took a slow drag and put out the cigarette. "Fine." He stood up and grabbed his phone off the counter. "I accept." He started sending out texts. "I will find out who it is. When I do, though, I expect to hear the full plan. I am considering this a down payment." He reached down and picked up the notebook, flipping through the pages. Izumi let out a small sigh of relief. "Thanks." "Boy, none of that. This is business." Jiren responded, not even bothering to look up from his phone. "Right. Sorry, how long do you think it will take?" Izumi stammered, she felt more drained than she expected. "I will get the information when I get it, don't get your panties in a twist, kid." Jiren shoved the notebook into a pocket. "Though I do have a question, you said you are going to humiliate the hero responsible. I know you can, I just want to know what you mean by that." "I am going to beat them." A quirkless girl is going to kick their ass. She looked up, fire burning in her eyes. Jiren let out a deep laugh, rubbing at his forehead. I see, so you were going to analyze the hero and make a plan tailored to them, that's why you can't tell me more than that makes sense. He smiled at Izumi, clearly impressed by her drive. But you still have to be able to fight with a hero capable of leveling a city block. I know it sounds impossible, but I am going to do it. Izumi gave Jiren a defiant glare, challenging him to doubt her. For his part, Jiren merely smiled and nodded as if that was the expected response. I am going to start training tomorrow. What kind of training? I know it's going to sound stupid, but parkour and weightlifting. Izumi fidgeted nervously, she wanted him to approve of her plan. But I want to focus on endurance and flexibility. I won't win in a straight-up fight, I need to use my brain. Which means I have to be able to dodge and outlast. I need endurance. She said, wringing her hands. Then I will base my fighting style off of Eraserhead and Night Eye. I want to be able to outthink and predict my opponents using my analytical mind to the best of my ability and use every little thing to my advantage. Both of them could almost be considered quirkless, and yet they are top heroes. Makes sense, well, except for the Night Eye thing. He has foresight, that is one hell of a quirk. Yes, but it has limitations and drawbacks, page 84 of that notebook actually. Izumi recalled everything she knew about foresight. First, in order to activate his power he must touch the target. So even if he were to use it in every fight he still has to make the first contact, and this is assuming that is his only activation condition. On top of that, I believe it has a long cooldown, for lack of a better term. Meaning not only does he need to be able to fight on equal terms with other quirk people just to be able to touch them and activate his quirk, I don't even think he uses his quirk most fights. If you watch his fights his movements sometimes become radically more crisp, that is when I believe he is using his quirk. Meaning I think he fights quirkless most of the time. The scariest thing about Night Eye is his ability to predict and outthink his opponent. Now the scary thing about Eraserhead is his use of ambushes and using the environment to his advantage, if you were to combine the two. Izumi gave a small timid smile. It was a pipe dream, even if she put in a ton of work she wasn't sure it was feasible, and yet it was the only option she could think of. Well thought out, very meticulous. It still surprises me that one so young can analyze things so thoroughly. However, there is one thing that is bugging me, what you described is a good idea, but it would mean you need a ton of experience to accomplish. However, the overall goal is achievable, I believe. Jiren said, pulling out another cigarette, smiling as he lit it up. Izumi took a moment to compose herself. Yeah, about that. I was going to join some underground fighting rings to practice. Start with quirkless fighting and work my way up to the quirked rings. I figure actual experience is better than learning martial arts. I can't afford to fight with anything other than brutal efficiency. Do you really think I can do this? Izumi felt bad seeking reassurance from Jiren, she figured it was probably because he was the first person to really believe in her. She kept expecting him to call her foolish, or worse, useless. I can find decent fight clubs for you, kid, don't want you falling in the wrong ones, but you have to be careful regardless. Jiren hesitated and looked Izumi in the eyes, I already told you. I think you are going to change the world. You are smart, scarily so, I have known people with intelligence quirks to not be half as smart or perceptive as you. Now with that being said, it won't be easy. You should get some sort of trainer, I also know nothing about having a healthy diet or what a good training regimen is, so I guess I can help with that. The last thing I need is for Dr. Kishitani to find out and kick my ass or charge me more cause I wasn't taking good enough care of you. Don't worry about the cost, it's going to be covered with the first book. Izumi gave a nod, she wasn't one to look a gift horse in the mouth. After all, if he wanted to do more to help her and not charge her extra, who was she to complain? She leaned back and looked up to Jiren. Think right business, let's do this. See, you are a quick learner. Now go grab us something to eat while I make some more calls. Jiren gave a smile as Izumi nodded. You got this, Izumi. Izumi wanted to die, her muscles burned and her whole body ached. She had been training for a mere 2 weeks now and she was barely seeing any signs of progress. To top it all off, she had not even gotten to learning parkour. Not only had her trainer told her to wait, everything she had read online agreed, build up basic muscle mass and endurance before attempting parkour. She grunted as she did another push-up, her arms threatening to give out. She didn't let this dissuade her as she let out a small grunt, lowering herself back down, going plus ultra as it was, she performed another sloppy push-up. Eventually her arms gave out after a few more push-ups, she let out a whimper. It was still early in the day and she had much to do. Izumi had a plan, one that deviated from the one her trainer had made for her. No, this revised plan would most definitely piss off her trainer, and truthfully she didn't care he was a pompous ass. She needed to push herself far more than normal, she had years of catching up to do. If she wanted to be able to take on whatever hero was responsible for her mother's death, playing it easy was not in the cards. She took a few deep breaths and performed one last push-up before dragging herself off the floor. Once standing, her arms flopped weakly to the side to soar to move. She headed out into the living room where she saw Jiren passed out on the couch. She had not even heard him come back last night. He had apparently been out drinking with a client celebrating a job well done. The smell of booze assaulted Izumi's nose. She felt a swell of panic rising within her. Thoughts of her dad clouding her mind. She did her best to suppress the memories and the panic they had brought with them as she quickly made her way to the kitchen, grabbing a protein shake and dashing outside. She needed to be away from the smell. She downed her pre-breakfast snack, disposing of the plastic bottle in a trash can outside. She drew up the hood of her simple black hoodie with the English word hoodie written on it and began her jog. She was heading southeast towards the sea. An hour later she arrived at her destination panting and dripping with sweat. She stood in front of the disgusting Dagaba Municipal Beach Park, though in her opinion it was closer to a scrapyard than a beach. Ever since Jiren had taken her under his wing, she had passed this beach every time she headed to the breeding grounds. Izumi stared at the scrap heap. She was going to clean the beach. Her reasoning was threefold. First, it would serve as extra training moving everything off the beach. Second, she could give back to the breeding grounds, hopefully improving the community by giving them access to the beach. And third, she needed spending money. She figured that she could collect metals and other valuable stuff and sell them at the junkyard, thus providing her with a bit of spending money. She rolled up her sleeves and gave a nod. It was time to get to work. Izumi had been training for 2 months. She was now at least seeing progress in her growth. No longer did 2 push-ups make her arms turn into jelly. She could jog much further before winding herself. Needless to say, her muscle mass had increased rather drastically. She had officially gone from a stick figure to vaguely human-shaped. Granted, this meant she was still well behind where she needed to be, but it was a start. She was following Jiren deep into the breeding grounds. He had simply said that he had something to show her and demanded she follow. She was hopeful that it was about her mother's killer, so she could focus on her plan to take down whoever was responsible. However, the more she followed him, the less likely it seemed. Deep within the breeding grounds, they finally reached their destination, one of the many abandoned warehouses. "Here we are," Jiren said, shaking his head, dropping his cigarette and putting it out with his foot. "You wanted to see the blood sports. This is it, the best and safest quirkless fighting ring, and yes, the location is randomized." He gave a nod of his head to the warehouse. Izumi's eyes lit up with hunger. She would not only get to see fights, she would get to fight. She craved the experience. "Cool your jets, you are just here to watch and learn," Jiren said, letting out a sigh as he rubbed the bridge of his nose. Clearly having expected Izumi's excited response. "What? What the hell is the point if I can't fight?" Izumi turned on her heel and stared up at Jiren. "I didn't just come here to watch, I have watched enough fights. The only way I can get better now is by gaining experience." Jiren let out a frustrated sigh. "It's bloody, kid. Even though I say this is the safest fighting ring, they still have casualties. I want to make sure you know what you are signing up for before letting you into the ring." "No," Izumi said, cutting Jiren off. She stepped closer and jabbed a finger into the man's chest. "You promised to help me change the world. I can't do that if you are holding me back. I am fighting tonight." She watched as a frustrated Jiren ran a hand through his hair before the resignation crossed his face and he let out a sigh. "Fine, just watch a few fights first. Deal." The fights were intense. More often than not, only one of the people walked out of the ring under their own power, and they were always covered in bruises and blood. The whole atmosphere was contagious, each fight another offering to an ancient god of blood and brutality. Izumi found herself spellbound watching as a competitor broke another's arm with a punch, causing the crowd to go wild. She finally understood how barbaric this was. It almost made the hero versus villains fight look civilized. She smiled. It was the perfect place to learn. She suppressed her crazed smile and turned to face Jiren. "Sign me up." Izumi entered the ring to the roar of the crowd. New blood was about to be spilt on these hallowed grounds. Jiren had begrudgingly signed her up for her first fight before pulling out his phone to make a call. She pushed all unnecessary thoughts from her mind as she took a deep breath. Slowly the roar of the crowd dimmed. She could feel her heart hammering away in her chest as she looked across at her opponent. She took stock. He was quite a bit taller than her, his muscles more defined, and he had several bruises adorning his face. Clearly she was the underdog in this fight and she didn't care. This wasn't about winning or losing. She gave the man a nod of respect. He looked surprised before returning it and taking a stance. Izumi brought her hands up to guard her face. The bell rang out signaling the start of the fight. Izumi resisted the urge to charge right in. Not only did her opponent have a large reach advantage over her, he clearly had experience. She narrowed her eyes and started to move. She needed to analyze and form a strategy. That was of course when her opponent made his move. He dashed in faster than Izumi had anticipated. She took a step back, twisting to the side, barely dodging the fist that was intended for her face. She was so stunned she missed her chance to counterattack. She took a moment to try and regain her calm, but he offered no quarter as he pressed his attack. Izumi flinched as his fist connected with her shoulder, sending her stumbling back. She had barely gotten the block up in time. The crowd roared. She tried to gain some distance and keep her guard up, but her opponent refused to let up. She was unable to dodge his next attack, a kick right into her midsection. Another roar from the crowd as she hit the ground, coughing and sputtering, trying to regain her breath. Her opponent was now raising his arms, riling up the adoring crowd. She was frustrated. In theory, her fighting style was to analyze her opponent's movements, predict their next move, and then punish with a counterattack. However, she was struggling to keep up. She grit her teeth in frustration. She pushed off the ground, grumbling. Her brain was working, but she couldn't get her body to react in time. She could not execute her plan, but that didn't mean she was not going to give up. She spat out some bile and glared at the man. She could do this. Even if it didn't come together today, she would succeed. She just needed to put in more practice. She took a stance once again, eyes locked on her target. Focus and predict his next attack. She watched in vivid detail as the man dashed in and launched another right hook at her face. She barely got a block in time, but missed his follow-up punch to her gut. She doubled over in pain as he delivered a blow to her back, sending her once more to the ground. In spite of everything, Izumi felt a crazed grin form. Yes, this fight was hopeless. She clearly had no chance of winning, but it was her starting point. She could only get better from here. She staggered back to her feet, the crowd still going wild, cheering on her determination. Her opponent even looked slightly impressed. His gaze was filled with respect as he took up his stance, ready to continue the assault. As the fight dragged on, there were times she could predict what was going to happen, and she was able to manage a half-hearted block, but that was all. If she had a bit more experience, perhaps she could have landed at least one decent hit. Overall though, even though this fight was a complete wash, the framework of her fighting style was validated. She just needed to build up her foundation of experience. She could not shy away from this challenge. She could fight. The crowd roared once more as the fight headed towards its inevitable conclusion. It wouldn't be long before they would be taken away and new challengers would approach, allowing more blood to flow onto the concrete altar. Her whole life she had never before tried to fight back. Part of her had believed it was not heroic to fight back against bullies, and the darker part of her believed she deserved to be bullied. Now that she was trying to fight back, she felt elated, even though she was currently getting her ass kicked and had not landed a single hit. Well, just the fact she was trying gave her an amazing rush. It was like some sort of dam had broken and she finally felt free. She needed more, she needed to get better. She had never felt so alive. In the end, she saw her opponent rushing in, and she made a decision. She abandoned her guard and went for a counter. However, between a combination of exhaustion, injuries, and slow reflexes got in her way. His right hook connected with her jaw well before her own strike could land. She was sent ragdolling to the floor, passed out cold. Izumi awoke to pain dulling her mind as she let out a grunt. Welcome back. Now do you get how stupid this was? You aren't ready. It took her a moment to recognize the voice. She blinked as her eyes locked on Jiren, who was staring at her, his expression a mixture of "I told you so" and worry. Izumi let out a laugh, her jaw twinging in pain as she did. When can I fight again? Her eyes burned with determination. What? I said, when can I fight again? I can do better next time. The sound of Jiren's disbelieving laugh filled her ears. Izumi, alright fine, I get the feeling if I were to try and stop you, you would go anyway. Let's go once a week for now until you stop getting your ass kicked. Sounds good. Oh, and one more thing. Next time I am going to win. Sure you will, kid, now get up, we gotta go home. It had been 3 weeks since her first fight. Last week she had once again been introduced into the pavement in front of the roaring crowd. Izumi, true to her word, wasn't going to fight this week, so she decided it was time to move on to learning her next skill, Parkour. She had watched video after video and read as many references she could get her hands on. Now it was time to start learning, which meant practicing the basics. Part of her was so annoyed that she was so behind in everything. She often wanted to just take a shortcut but always held herself back. There was no shortcut that was worth not having good fundamentals. So starting from the ground up was the only way. She was in a park, practicing what was called shoulder rolls, using her hands to pivot and then roll over her shoulder and back onto her feet. With the intent being to slow the fall and elongate the collision time. It was a tedious process and she was drawing all sorts of stares as she rolled on the grass. Izumi was focused, she had so much to cover. She went through the motions, practicing basic moves that would be required for more advanced maneuvers. It was getting late when she finally decided to halt her training session. She had made good progress, or at least she felt she had for only one day of training. At the end she even managed to run a small course around the park to put some of the moves she practiced into action. She took a deep breath and wiped away the sweat when she heard what sounded like a sob. She looked around confused before hesitantly following the sound. Izumi stiffened as she stumbled upon a girl covered in blood and curled up on the ground, a dead bunny by her side. Izumi tried to swallow the lump in her throat, the bunny was the cause of all the blood. The girl looked pale, sickly, her skin clung to her in an unnatural way, and she was muttering. It's not enough, why can't it be enough? Why doesn't it work? Over and over again looking at the rabbit in distress, she picked it up and bit down, sucking before pulling away and throwing the dead rabbit to the ground. Izumi took a hesitant step forward, noticing that the girl was shaking in what she assumed was pain and that she was completely drenched in sweat. Are you okay? Izumi's timid voice rang out. The girl's golden cat-like gaze locked onto Izumi, there was a hunger in her crazed gaze that caused Izumi to freeze. She felt her muscles tense as she got ready to flee should the girl prove hostile. The next thing Izumi noticed was that the girl had clearly been crying, her eyes were unnaturally red. The girl flinched as she locked eyes with Izumi. After a moment of internal struggle, she let out a whimper and pulled away. No, get away. Go away, I can't. Her movements were sluggish, and Izumi couldn't help but notice red scars on the woman's arms and wrists. She shivered knowing full well what those were, she had some scars herself. Hey, it's okay, I am not going to hurt you. The girl let out a deranged laugh as Izumi spoke. No one wants to help, she sneered, no one cares, everyone says it's wrong. That I am a freak, don't want your help. Nothing is free. She stumbled as her stomach let out a low growl and she pulled in on herself, punching at her stomach. Stop, no, I can't. Izumi watched as worry overcame her. Hey, look, let me help you, you are hungry right? I can go get you food. No. No food. Don't need. The girl looked up and a crazed smile on her bloody face, as if something had snapped inside of her. Need what they tell me, I can't have what everyone calls me a villain for having, need blood. Izumi took a half step back when she saw the girl's vampiric fangs and everything clicked into place. The poor girl was starving and needed blood, she was most likely suffering from withdrawal because of her quirk. Even in a quirk-filled society there was still certain faux pas one could not cross. Drinking blood was one of them. Izumi hesitated, part of her wanted to leave the girl alone, but she couldn't, that wasn't who she was. She may not be a hero, but she wasn't going to reject someone because of their quirk. Slowly, so as not to spook the girl, and held out her arm, hardening her resolve. Then feed, I don't mind. You need it right, it's because of your quirk, you have to have blood to supplement your diet. It is not uncommon for people who have blood-based quirks. The girl stared in disbelief, then after a brief moment's hesitation, she descended upon Izumi biting down on her forearm, her fangs sinking in, piercing Izumi's flesh, as she then began to drink deeply. Izumi ignored the brief flash of pain as the girl latched onto her arm, she simply watched as the starving vampire girl drank deeply, trying to satiate her hunger. Having someone drink blood from her arm through fangs was an interesting experience. Jeereet, this feels kinda nice actually, and I might be enjoying it. She felt her face flush lightly at the implications. Just before Izumi was about to ask her to stop, the girl reluctantly pulled away, blinking lightly. Her complexion already looked far better than she had a few moments ago, the madness in her eyes had receded. Izumi was about to ask if she felt better, only to stumble back in deepened surprise, as she was suddenly now sat face to face with herself. The girl let out a laugh in Izumi's voice before sitting down and frowning. Why? Izumi stared into her own emerald green eyes. Because you were hungry. Izumi answered with a shrug, you need to eat blood right? You were going through withdrawal and I am assuming starvation, at least it was what it looked like to me, and judging by your complexion getting better. Looks like I was right. Izumi grabbed at a pebble and chucked it across the park, besides I get what it's like to be ostracized, people suck. So us outcasts have to stick together, right? She said, trying to keep the bitterness out of her voice. Oh, I should introduce myself, I am Midoriya Izumi. She extended her hand, her arm still lightly dripping blood. Toga Himiko, you're weird Izumi-chan. Toga stared at Izumi for a long while, as Izumi blushed at the casual use of her first name. Before she could respond she watched as Toga's Izumi facade started to melt away, revealing the woman's pale form. Why do people treat you like shit? Izumi felt her smile falter, well timed to find out if she also hates me for being quirkless. Oh, I am quirkless. Spent my whole life being a punching bag for shit stains. Anger flashed through her at the memory of Bakugo, I hope he is suffering thinking he got me to kill myself, probably not though, probably celebrating. She readied herself for the verbal abuse that seemed to accompany someone learning of her defect. Oh, that's stupid. Himiko stared at Izumi's arm, still slowly dripping blood, and licked her lips subconsciously. So is depriving someone of blood when they need it for their quirk or to, live. Izumi shrugged as Toga let out a laugh, a cat-like smile gracing the woman's face. Izumi stood up and offered a hand. Can you stand Toga-chan? Call me Himiko. Anyone that feeds me and is as cute as you is my friend. Besides, you look great covered in blood. Thanks. Izumi blinked in confusion trying to contain her blush, only to fail miserably as Himiko smiled at her. You are very welcome Izumi-chan. Himiko quickly closed the distance and kissed Izumi. Izumi felt her face go nuclear, she was now a shade of red that man had not previously discovered. Himiko. She yelped, jumping back and stumbling slightly to a delighted cackle of the vampiric girl. Himiko was letting out a delighted laugh as she locked her golden cat gaze on Izumi. You can't just kiss me like that. Izumi said with a light pout. Why not? We're blood buddies now. You let me drink your blood, a kiss is nothing compared to that. Oh, speaking of, you should give me your number so we can meet up again and again. Izumi stared at Himiko in stunned silence, her brain having just taken a hard turn and crashed into a tree. She sputtered, her mouth opening and closing rapidly in a perfect impersonation of a goldfish. Eventually she found her voice, shaky and pitchy though it was. You don't just that's not you. Izumi had many words she wanted to say, but instead found herself flustered beyond belief and struck speechless. Himiko gave a bloody smirk and leaned in causing Izumi to flinch slightly, mostly in fear of being kissed again. Not that it hadn't been nice. Izumi crossed her arms and shot a glare at Himiko as the blonde spoke. You are very cute, Izumi. Especially when you get flustered. I do want to be your girlfriend eventually, but it's clear you aren't ready for that. I don't mind waiting, but if it's okay, can I have your number? You know, in case I can't get blood again. Or just to talk to my favorite cutie. Izumi opened her mouth and closed it a few times before pinching the bridge of her nose. She wanted to be upset about the girl stealing her first kiss, but judging by what little she knew already that was probably Himiko's first kiss as well, and she clearly had been the target of as much, if not more, abuse than Izumi had. She made her decision, even though she knew she couldn't be a hero, that didn't mean she couldn't help people. Especially when they have such a unique and valuable quirk, she could be useful in the future. A small dark voice whispered in her mind. She shivered and ignored that for now. Instead she pulled out her phone. Yeah, you can have my number, and I would be glad to help get you blood next time you need it. Izumi gave the vampire a genuine smile. We are friends after all, Himiko. Himiko eagerly took her number and sent Izumi a message before closing the distance in the blink of an eye. Izumi didn't even have time to react before a second kiss was stolen from her lips. She had to admit she was impressed with Toga's graceful and quick movements. Maybe she could teach me something about how to move like that. You're the best Izumi. Frustration was threatening to overwhelm Izumi. Her training felt like it was hitting a plateau. Parkour was hard, the concepts were easy, but implementing the moves and keeping up her stamina was proving a challenge. Honestly it was her fault, if she had spent half the time she did trolling forums for information about heroes on training instead, she would be in great shape and be better equipped for parkour. Her weekly fights weren't much better. Just her getting her ass handed to her over and over again. She fell into one of two modes once a fight started. The first was overthinking everything which killed her reaction time. The second was acting recklessly after getting frustrated or too mentally drained, both resulted in the same thing, getting introduced to the concrete altar. Once again if she had just spent time applying what she had watched from hero fights to actually learning. She wanted to scream, then there was Himiko. Izumi had very mixed feelings about the cat-like vampiress. The girl insisted that they were girlfriends after a week of constant talking, and Izumi supplying her with blood, both from herself and bags she got off Jiren. If Izumi was being completely honest, the thought wasn't unappealing. She had never considered dating someone before, she just knew she couldn't afford the distraction right now. So she tried to keep Himiko at arm's reach, which was proving harder than it should be. The more they talked the more Izumi empathized with her. Her story was also one of abuse, but where Izumi had her mother to help Himiko had no one growing up. She couldn't help but feel a kinship and compassion for her, though that didn't stop her from wanting to strangle the woman sometimes. Right now was one of those times. Izumi had expressed interest in learning to be more graceful and quick like Himiko. The other woman had immediately taken that as an invitation to help train her. It turned out that on top of being very graceful, Himiko was also very adept at stealth and stabbing people. So she had invented some training for Izumi, currently both of them were in the park where they had met. Except it was long after dark and both girls were dressed in dark colors. They were basically playing tag with fake knives. However, no matter how Izumi tried to hide, Himiko would always find her with ease, and she could never sense her approaching. She also could never find the girl before feeling the fake knife in her kidney. The worst part was, when Himiko won or killed Izumi, she would take a reward in the form of a kiss. Needless to say it felt like these sessions were more about kissing practice than anything else. Still she was grateful for Himiko, after all she was another person who believed in her. When she honestly felt like she couldn't do it, Himiko would always be there for her. Izzy, you are so much stronger than you believe, you have to have faith in yourself. You will get there, I know it. Izumi was currently in the middle of abandoning subtlety, she was sprinting through the park, eyes swiveling from side to side as she looked for Himiko. She didn't even slow as she approached a planter, choosing to go over it instead of around, she hopped, foot extended. Trying to catch a glimpse of Himiko when she felt her foot catching the edge of the planter and sending her tumbling. She never got to finish her curse as she hit the ground, rolling into it, wincing in pain. She felt the bitter tears forming in her eyes as she lay face first on the ground, not even bothering to get up. She felt herself start to sob as she whimpered and rolled onto her back. She was getting nowhere, Bakugo was right, I really am a Deku. She curled up and just sobbed, she didn't even notice when Toga sat next to her and moved to put a hand on her shoulder but stopped unsure. Eventually Izumi was able to turn off the waterworks and just laid on her back staring up at the black night sky. No stars could be seen, too much light pollution. Izzy, are you okay? Himiko's voice was hesitant and full of genuine worry. For a while she didn't answer, just staring at the infinite void above them. No, I really am not okay. She said, the bitterness in her voice shocked even her. You know you can talk to me about it, right? I have dumped all my shit on you, but you never really say anything back, so what's going on? Izumi nearly snapped back that it was none of her business, but she didn't, and the rage just sputtered out, leaving her feeling empty and hollow. I'm not getting better. Everything I try to do I suck at, I'm not improving, but I need to, I want to, but what the fuck is the point? I don't have a fucking quirk. I won't be able to do what I want anyways, and it just feels pointless. Even saying it aloud didn't help. It just seemed to make her doubts feel more real and concrete. Izzy, why are you doing this? When you said you wanted to learn my skills, I didn't ask questions because you were my first friend and I would do anything you ask of me, but I would like to know. There was no judging or pity in Himiko's voice. Izumi shot her a quick glance and saw that the girl was staring at Izumi with genuine curiosity in her gaze. Lie to her, warp her to your cause. That dark voice echoed in her mind. She bit her lip and gazed back up at the sky. She eventually went with the truth. I want to take down the hero that was responsible for my mother's death. For the longest time, my goal was to be a hero. Then my number one idol told me my dream was impossible. So, she drifted off, her mouth going dry as she shivered at the memory of how low she had gotten. So I planned to take my best friend's advice and swan dive to get a quirk in my next life. Someone stepped in and stopped me. Told me my hero was an idiot if they thought I couldn't be a hero. Well, after that it became an obsession of wanting to beat the heroes who pushed me down and elevated my abusers. I wanted to prove them wrong. Prove that being quirkless isn't a disadvantage that can't be overcome. Then I learned more of the corruption and I realized I never knew who was responsible for Mom's death. No one was held accountable, so I want to do something about it. She laughed at herself, feeling like an idiot. I guess the short answer is a burning desire to get revenge. The silence that stretched out became super uncomfortable and Izumi looked back to Himiko, the rage she saw on the vampire's face shook Izumi to the core. Who told you to take a swan dive? She asked, her voice filled with rage and disgust. No one important anymore, Himiko. It's fine, it's in the past. She hesitantly reached out and took Himiko's hand, which snapped the vampire out of her rage as she blushed lightly and smiled. Fine, I will drop this for now. However, I want to say something, Izzy. Himiko gave Izumi's hand a squeeze as she shifted to lay on her back next to Izumi. I am going to help you get your revenge. I hate heroes too. I hate how unfair it is for those born with certain quirks or without quirks. No matter what happens, Izumi, I am on your side. Izumi felt tears start to well in her eyes again. I am not getting anywhere though. I'm stuck, I keep failing, I'm not getting better. Before she was able to go on a longer rant, Himiko chopped Izumi on the head. You are so hard on yourself, you goof. You are already leaps and bounds better, Izumi. Look, I had to get good at sneaking in my house. They would lock away my medical blood and you know I need that too well to not die. However, if I got caught stealing the blood I needed to live, my parents would beat and berate me. Look, my point is I have had a lifetime of experience at being stealthy. You are just starting and already pushing me to my limits. Not only do you pick things up terrifyingly fast, you are constantly adapting it to fit you. Also, if you are talking about your Parker, I don't know if you realize, but you are still kinda growing. Himiko pointed to Izumi's chest, that has to be throwing off your center of gravity, not to mention I think you grew a few centimeters, so you just aren't used to your body yet. Izumi felt her face flush, what Himiko said made sense, why hadn't I thought of that? She cleared her throat and looked back to Himiko, wiping away some of her tears, only to smear a small amount of blood on her face. She frowned and looked at her scraped palm. That was going to suck to clean later. Thanks Himiko, you are a good friend. Himiko licked her lips at the sight of the blood and Izumi laughed lightly, hey are you hungry? Since you won the night, I think it should be your reward. Izumi said with a small smile, she wanted to do something nice for her friend. She had never had a friend like Himiko before. Please Himiko squealed, happily reaching for Izumi's arm. Izumi smiled and lifted her arm offering it to Himiko, feeling the fangs sink into her flesh, she flinched and resisted the urge to pull away, letting Himiko drink. She wasn't feeling nearly as beat up over this anymore. Jiren looked over the notebook he had purchased from Izumi, the information sent a chill down his spine. If he hadn't had a test done to verify Izumi was indeed quirkless, he would have sworn she had an intelligence or analysis quirk. He took another drink of his whiskey, currently he was reading the 20-page entry on Rescue Hero 13. Not only did it include basic information that could be found via the Hero Association website, such as quirk, name, height, age, weight, and general hero costume description. She even went on to describe more about the hero's personal life than Jiren would have thought was publicly available. Birthday, gender, favorite food, first appearance, total number of rescues, number of apprehensions, sexual orientation, and so on. Of course it was all accurate, Jiren had done his own research to verify, but the part that terrified him was the next few pages. It went on to describe not only how her quirk worked, but theories on how it didn't affect herself as well as countermeasures and how to fight back. Then she described her support equipment that she has been seen to use, and that part sent shivers down Jiren's spine that was supposed to be classified, but between watching the hero fight and educated guesses, Izumi was able to predict almost all of the hero's equipment, as well as speculate on future equipment that would make the hero even more viable. Jiren had spent actual money on the first few heroes in the notebook to see how accurate Izumi was. He gulped and took a drag on his cigarette putting it out. She had roughly a 94% accuracy rating on support equipment, these notebooks were a goddamn goldmine. He had already made back his losses and then some by selling some of the local heroes' information. Then take into account that each notebook averaged 5 to 6 heroes and she had a whole safe of these things. Jiren drank another sip of whiskey frowning when he realized the glass was empty. Jiren popped the bottle and poured himself another drink, he was frustrated. She was clearly working her ass off and it impressed him. She was terrifyingly motivated and dead set on taking down the hero that had taken her mom away. He wanted to help but that was the problem. He took another drink and frowned. He kept coming up with a big all question mark. His contacts in the police department said that all of their paperwork was redacted and useless. He had then had to get creative, he went to some politicians and greased some hands, but once again it came up with a big fat nothing. He took a long drag as he frowned, the fact this was buried behind several miles of every color of tape worried him. He wasn't giving up, but it was going to be a bit longer before he could give Izumi what she wanted, and he was feeling confused. Part of him felt guilty he was making a client wait, and the other part wanted to continue finding nothing to keep her protected. Whoever was behind this didn't want to be found, and usually poking those types of people was not wise. Still, Jiren was a professional. He would see this through no matter what. He just was going to have to do something he really wasn't looking forward to, try to find a mole, someone to bribe who worked in records of the Hero Association. Jiren downed the rest of the drink and took a large drink from the bottle. He was going to have to be careful or this was going to bite him in the ass. That's it for today guys, hope you all enjoyed this video. If you do consider leaving a like, share and subscribe. And don't forget to check out the author of this story. All details in description. Thanks for watching, take care.